Okay, today I'm going to make a family favorite. We're going to make cornbread dressing. I got a couple of pans in the oven already. So before we make it, let's talk about something else for a second. If you're cooking for somebody else, always wear your mask. I know nobody likes to wear a mask and nobody hates wearing it worse than I do, but it's necessary if you're cooking for somebody else. The other thing is, if you're cooking for yourself or anybody, wash your hands and make sure you have clean fingernails. I hate to go into a restaurant and see people preparing food and have long, dirty fingernails. In fact, I'll turn around and walk out. So anyhow, let's get to the dressing. So here's what we need for our dressing. First thing we need is cornbread. I cooked my cornbread last night, so it's already prepared. We need a mixture of celery, green onions, and regular onions. Salt and pepper. I've got my chicken that I cooked last night. I actually cooked a whole chicken and I diced it up. So we have chicken, and I always keep some of the broth out of the chicken. So let's mix everything together. Oh, and also I've got chicken broth. I used to buy the Swanson brand chicken broth, but I actually like Kroger better. It actually tastes better. Now, can anybody guess why my chicken broth containers are upside down? If you can guess, put it in the comments of the video. All right, so let's mix this up. So first thing we have to do is crumble up our cornbread. And this doesn't have to be perfect. And if you're watching the video and you're thinking, why is he doing that with his hands? Hands are the best mechanism, best tool to use. My hands are very clean. I wash my hands and I always scrub my fingernails before I cook. And I recommend you do the same thing. Okay, so your cornbread, you don't want to crumble it up. You don't want to pulverize it. You just want to break it into really small pieces. And the reason is, when we cook the dressing, we're going to put a lot of chicken broth in it. So here's what your cornbread should look like. It should have consistency about like that. Okay, so usually about a pawn and a half of cornbread. And while I'm cooking, I might as well show you what a pawn is. I noticed a lot of people don't know what a pawn of cornbread is. So let me grab the pan and I'll show you. Whenever I cook cornbread, I always cook it in a metal pan like this. Usually one pan of dressing gets a large pan of cornbread and a small pan of cornbread. I don't like cornbread if it's not cooked in a black pan, especially for my dressing, so that gives it a really good flavor. I've tried to figure out for years why the flavor changes if you're cooking in a black cast iron pan. I don't know why, but I know it's better cornbread. I think it has something to do with the heat distribution, and that's just a theory. Anyhow, we're going to crumble up our cornbread really good, and you don't have to make it super small. It just needs to be crumbled. In fact, in your dressing, you want to see some of the brown off the cornbread. I know when my grandmother cooked it, she would put really big chunks of cornbread in her dressing. And nobody can cook like Grandma. All right, put the last few crumbles in there. Set our pan aside. And I recommend you put your ingredients in the order I'm doing it in. Make sure it's all crumbled and mixed up good. All right, go ahead and put some salt and pepper. You don't want to overload it with salt or pepper. The chicken broth actually has a lot of salt in it already. You want to do it to taste, and I know you can't taste it until it's cooked, but I've learned over the years about how many shakes to give it. That's how I measure things I cook. I measure it by how many shakes of salt and pepper it needs. Stir that up good. Go ahead and put a little bit more salt, a little bit more pepper in. The reason you put your salt and pepper in first is because you can actually mix them in a nice homogeneous mixture. If you wait until you put your any of your moist ingredients in, what'll happen is the salt and pepper will stick to the chicken or stick to the vegetables, and it won't get evenly distributed throughout your cornbread. So that looks good. And look, cooking cornbread dressing is not an exact science. You know, you sort of do the best you can. Everybody's dressing is different. I don't like dressing that you buy in a store because it's all the same. There's never any variety into it. I like something that somebody made theirself from scratch. I think it's just, you know, it's better quality. All right, so I've got my celery, my green onions, and my white onions that I mixed up, and you don't need a huge amount. And make a note, you have two types of onions, green and white onions. You don't want to overload the onion flavor in it. So let's go ahead and put all that in. And mix that up. You know, my grandmother never owned a spoon like this. She would always do it with her hands. And it's funny, all these years later, 40-something, 45 years later, I can still taste her cornbread dressing. When you mix, you want to make sure you mix to the very bottom, or you scoop down at the very bottom and turn over your cornbread really good. All right, so that's in. Let's go ahead and put our chicken in. Now, in my chicken, notice I've got a mixture of white and dark meat. I do not buy, when I'm making cornbread dressing, I do not buy the pre-cut chicken breast. I buy an entire chicken and roast a whole chicken. I usually roast it the night before, let it cool, and then cut it up the next day. Mix that in really good. All right, so that's what it looks like now. Oh man, that's gonna be good. I used to love watching Justin Wilson. He was a cook back in the 70s and the early 80s. I used to love watching him cook because he would talk about how much he loved his food he cooked. He always drank wine while he was cooking. I thought that was pretty neat, even though I was too young to drink wine back then. All right, so let's go ahead and put a little bit of our chicken broth from our chicken in here, and not a lot. This is mostly chicken fat. What I found is that gives it a flavor that you can't buy an artificial chicken flavor. Like some people will take chicken bouillon cubes and mix them up in water, and they'll put that in their, they'll make chicken broth out of that and put that in their dressing, and it just doesn't taste the same. The taste is better if you actually have a real broth from a real chicken. So let's get that mixed in really good. And it's worth doing a few extra passes over your mixture to make sure that broth is evenly distributed. All right, that's good. Now let's put our chicken broth in. So you want your dressing to be soupy. You know, for years I made chicken and dressing, or chicken dressing, and I never put enough broth in. And then my mother-in-law's 97-year-old mother said, "You're doing it all wrong, son. You need to make it soupy." You know, it's what I would try and do is cook it so that it, or mix in enough broth so that it cooked fast. She said, "No, you don't want it to cook fast. You want it to cook slow." So this is a 32-ounce container. You need about 1 3/4 containers. Okay, the camera turned off while I was mixing up the dressing, but I want to show it to you. Here we go. I'm going to take it out of the oven. This is sort of hard to do with one hand, but we're going to make it. All right. So there's our dressing. Let's mix it up. See how it came out. Oh yeah, perfect. Now one thing I want to mention, a lot of people put eggs in their dressing. There are already eggs in the cornbread, so I didn't put extra egg in the dressing. Sometimes I do. Some people say it makes it a little bit lighter, but it tastes really good. I don't think anybody will complain about it. So I hope you enjoy your cornbread dressing.